Hey, I'm Stephanie Forian, and it's Tech Talk time.
Tech Talk, Tech Talk,
Time to talk tech. Welcome to my weekly web series on the techniques and technology behind the creative process. In last week's video, which I'll link in the down bar, I talked about 5 tips for singing when you're sick. One of those tips was to make sure that you can hear your voice and the music well. But of course, that tip isn't just important when you're sick. It's always important that you can hear your voice and the music, whether you are performing live, practicing in a rehearsal space, or singing in the studio. So today I'd like to focus on the benefits of good monitoring and how you can optimize your singing by making sure that you can hear yourself and the music well. For those of you who might be new to singing on stage or in a band or in the studio, it's not always easy to hear exactly what you need to in order to sing well. Each situation comes with its own challenges. Live venues often have difficult acoustics that can cause the sound to become muddy when you start playing music. Rehearsal spaces aren't always set up in an ideal way, and often they're in loud buildings, so sound from other bands is kind of seeping into your space while you're trying to play. And in the studio, sometimes it can take a while to figure out exactly what you need in your headphone mix in order for you to perform well. So we're going to be talking about how to deal with some of these challenges today, and I'll make sure to leave timestamps for each of the subjects in the description box so you can simply fast forward to whatever is most relevant for you. When I first began performing in larger venues with louder bands, I was really struggling. I felt like I was starting to get pitchy and that I was starting to lose the nuance in my voice that I had worked so hard to develop. And I was starting to get really down on myself. I doubted my abilities. However, what I came to realize was the problem wasn't with my vocal technique, it was with my monitoring. I wasn't able to hear the instruments I needed to hear, the frequencies I needed to hear in order to perform well. And this unbalanced mix was the source of my problems. However, once I learned what I needed to hear, and I was able to properly communicate that to our monitor technician, all of a sudden I was able to do my job really well. A big part of figuring out what I needed was simply learning which instruments I definitely need to hear as a reference through my monitor, and learning which instruments I don't need in that monitor mix in order to perform well. Because oftentimes knowing what you don't need to hear is just as important as knowing what you do need to hear. Because I find the fewer signals you put through that monitor, the easier it is to get a helpful mix. So for example, if the guitar amps are really loud on stage, I don't necessarily need any extra guitar signal going through my monitor because I'm hearing enough direct sound from the stage. Same thing goes with the bass. I don't tend to use the pitches or the frequencies from the bass guitar in order to pitch my vocals. So that's another item I don't need in my mix. And the drums, I'm normally standing pretty darn close by, so I can definitely hear what the drums are doing, and I don't necessarily need them in there either. However, I definitely need my fellow background vocalists in the mix in order to create a good blend. I need to be able to hear them well. And instruments like acoustic guitars and keyboards, things that are kind of in the mid-range that can help me pitch, those are the sorts of things I like to have in my mix. Of course, this changes depending on the acoustics of the venue. It can also change depending on the constellation that you're playing with. Every band has a different sound and different instruments, so you might have different needs. So you're going to have to tweak your preferences for each individual situation. Learning what the different frequency ranges sound like can also be extremely helpful in this situation. For example, if you can tell your monitor tech specific frequencies that you would like either turned up or turned down in order to give you a really clear mix, that's going to make sound check a lot faster and easier for the both of you, and it can really help contribute to a very clear mix, giving you exactly what you need. If you would like to practice some audio frequency training, I have included a link to a free trainer in the description box. Now on to rehearsal spaces, which pose challenges of their own. The dimensions and shape of rehearsal rooms are often very different than what you find on stage, so it can be challenging to try to develop and refine your stage sound in a room that's so very different from the stages you'll be performing on. In addition to this, sometimes they're smaller or more cramped, and even if a drummer really honestly gives their best effort to try to adjust their sound to the size of the room, the drums are still going to be pretty loud. And the fact is that electric guitars and amps do need to be turned up a certain amount simply to get certain effects. So you can't really turn them down too much either. And then add this to the fact that a lot of rehearsal spaces are located in buildings with other rehearsal rooms in them. So you're also hearing sound from other bands bleed into your room while you're trying to rehearse. The situation can become rather cacophonous, and this can be challenging for vocalists because we have limited volume. There is no gain knob in our throats. But I do have 3 tips that can make life a little bit easier for vocalists in loud rehearsal spaces. The first one is to make sure that you're using a microphone that suits your voice and that really picks up the detail in your voice when you sing. Because if your microphone is picking up the detail in your voice, it's much more likely that you're going to be able to hear that detail reproduced through the PA system. And if you can hear the detail in your voice, you are much less likely to oversing, overblow your voice, because you can actually hear what you're doing. Tip number 2 is to use in-ear monitors or closed headphones when you rehearse. The advantage to this is that both of these types of headphones will cut down the direct sound from the room, and you can get more sound from the board, and oftentimes you can surgically shape that sound so you can hear exactly what you need to. I do realize, though, that many bands do not have access to a monitor system when they're rehearsing, and in those cases, vocalists do still have some opportunity to hear themselves better if they have the right gear. For example, I use vocal effects pedals when I perform, and because I use them when I perform, I also have to have them with me during rehearsal. And the advantage to this is that they often have a headphone jack on them, and so I can plug my headphones directly into my effects pedal, and that gives me access to a crystal clear vocal signal for me. It's not ideal because I can't craft the sound that I'm hearing from my bandmates, but it is certainly better than nothing. And tip number 3 is to invest in a good pair of attenuated earplugs. These are slightly more expensive than their drugstore cousins. However, I really feel like it's worth it for musicians to spend a little bit of extra money for them because attenuated earplugs tend to bring down all the frequencies relatively equally over the whole spectrum, whereas drugstore earplugs tend to only take down the high frequencies and you end up hearing a very bassy, muffled sound. And that is not what you want to hear when you're trying to make music with your colleagues. Now, using earplugs in a rehearsal situation is not ideal, and I realize that. However, if you don't have access to good monitoring, if you can't use headphone monitors as a backup and you're stuck, then sometimes it's simply easy to reduce the amount of noise that you're hearing. Once you reduce that volume, it can be easier for your brain to decipher the information in those audio signals that you need in order to perform better. And a second advantage to that is, of course, that whenever you have earplugs in, you are going to be able to hear your voice better for pitching purposes. So I realize it's not ideal, but sometimes in a worst case scenario, it can really save the day. And lastly, let's talk about some of the challenges of working in the studio. It is very easy to underestimate the importance of a good mix and good headphones when you're working in the studio. I remember when I was first learning how to record music on my own that I just went out and bought the very first pair of cheap headphones that I could find, and I didn't even realize how bad they were because I didn't have much experience and I didn't really have much to compare them to. However, I did notice that my vocals were kind of pitchy and my performances were really kind of strangely inauthentic. And it surprised me because I could sing so well on stage, but I couldn't in the studio. And I thought, well, maybe it's a problem with my technique or a problem with my attitude. Maybe I'm the type of performer who needs an audience there in order to give an authentic performance. And just as I was about to give up hope of a career working in the studio, a colleague of mine lent me a pair of high-quality professional studio headphones, and it changed my world. Suddenly, I could hear all the detail, even in my badly mixed backing tracks, and needless to say, I immediately saved up for my own pair, and I have not looked back since. And the moral of the story is, that you need to make sure that your headphones offer you the sound quality you need for a great performance. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to run out and spend an arm and a leg getting the best of the best. It simply means that you need to make sure that the headphones you use accurately represent the frequencies that you personally need to hear in order to sing well. And on top of that, a monitor mix is just as important in the studio as it is live. So make sure you adjust the levels of your backing track so that you can hear the information you need to in order to sing well. And I have one last tip for improving your monitoring in studio conditions, and that is the one ear on, one ear off headphone method. If you've ever seen any of my one-woman band videos here on YouTube, you might have noticed that I often wear my headphones like this. As cool as it is, this lopsided look is not a fashion statement. It's helping me monitor my sound. I hear the backing track through here, and I also hear the signal as the microphone records my voice through this ear. I hear only my voice through this ear as it sounds in the room. And I find that the combination of hearing the way my voice sounds through the microphone and hearing the way my voice sounds in the room gives me the perfect amount of information to really offer solid pitching and nuanced vocals. And that is it for today's video. If you have any questions about what I talked about today, please feel free to ask me in the comments. If you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up to let me know. And of course, it also helps my channel grow. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some of your time with me today. I hope you have a wonderful week and that I'll see you again soon for some more Tech Talk time.
Red, 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 red,